All right, well, it's 10, and I'll get started kind of with my spiel of Zoom and mute and all the good things. But hello, my name is Hannah McCarthy, and I'm a committee woman here in Chester County. Super excited that you guys have joined me today and joined John in this town hall. So good morning, welcome. Hope you have your coffee. I didn't make it to the Amish market yesterday, but I wanted to get like some breakfast treats and totally forgot. So I will be treatless today, but it's fine. So I wanted to take a moment and just say that we're all going to be on mute while this town hall goes on. And what that means is that we'll have a nice, clean and crisp way to hear John speak this morning. So if you do have a question, we're going to be using the chat feature. So hopefully this isn't your first Zoom meeting, but if it is, that's totally fine. To use the chat feature, you're going to scroll down to the bottom of your screen and you should see like a bubble and it says chat. And if you press that, you're going to have another screen pop up probably on the right hand side of your screen, and you can write in questions throughout the whole town hall. I will be observing those questions and kind of taking note of them and collecting them for the end for the Q&A section. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, my name is Hannah, and I'm super excited to start this town hall. I'm going to be introducing our candidate for Congress, John Emmons, and his beautiful background. You can see he's very patriotic. I love it. So John is a graduate of SUNY with a engineering degree, and he has spent his career in manufacturing and operations all over the world. He is married to Allison for over now 40 years. It's probably 40 years in a week, right?
Yeah.
Very exciting. And he has 3 children and three grandchildren, which is really exciting. Congratulations. He is serving as our candidate, like I had said, and I'm very excited for him to be here this morning. So John, I'll let you take it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And as Hannah said, yes, I'm John Emmons, and I'm standing up for the promise of America. I think that's it's important. I want to keep repeating that. People need to know that I am standing up for the promise of America and what that means. So you'll hear a lot about that today. Again, thank you for coming. You know, Saturdays, especially this time of year, are difficult. Hannah, thank you for hosting. You do a fabulous job, so thank you very much. Folks, the other thing I want to do is just remind you that we've done quite a few of these now, and if you can't get on Saturday morning, they all are available on our YouTube site. So anytime you want to go and review those, it's just go to YouTube, type in the search bar, Emmons for Congress, and up it comes, and you can select from any one of a number of videos that we've done. So take advantage of that. We continue to add content, and we'll continue to add content for about another 3.5 months. So it's there. Tell other people about it, direct them to it, and we will continue to build that. The Emmons moment for today, I always like to include a mention about the Emmons family. The highlight for this week is that today is my birthday. Yay! 62 years ago today, in 1958, I was born up in central New York. So this is my birthday. So how am I going to celebrate my birthday? Well, we're going to do it with a town hall this morning. We're going to do it with a picnic this afternoon up in Berks County. That's the life of a candidate. That's good. I'm enjoying that. I'd love to go to Berks County. And actually tomorrow we're going to have our grandson come, and we're going to have his first attempt at picking blueberries in the backyard. So it's going to be fun. The agenda for today, I just want to quickly go over the agenda. We'll have a quick COVID-19 moment. We'll have a brief review of last week, because right now we're in a series. So this is the second in a series of 3. Then I'll go into the topic for today, which is freedom. Do we still have it? Have we lost it? And then lastly, we'll have our typical Q&A. So keep the cards and letters coming on the Q&A. So first, I will jump into it. We have a lot of content today that I want to get through. So we'll get right into it. The first thing is the COVID-19 moment. As I mentioned last week, the COVID-19 issue is still out there. We need to be concerned about it. It still is an issue. We know how to be safe now. So we do see the media continuing to talk about it when it suits their purposes and fan the flames. We still see that there is an argument about the data and what really is COVID-19, et cetera, with the various statistics. So that's all bubbling. It's going to continue to bubble, as I said last week, until at least November. But I think the key thing is we've learned so much. We basically know how to be safe. We know how to operate in this environment. So we need to move forward. The thing that struck me this week, the highlight I wanted to give today, was probably for the first time this struck me. I've seen just in the past few days where my opponent, Chrissy Houlihan, is proudly crowing about saving 190,000 jobs in our PA District 6 through the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, I think that's disingenuous, quite honestly. To me, it's a bit like a fire chief who goes and sets a building ablaze and then goes and brings the fire department and puts out the blaze and then jumps in front of a camera and tries to take credit for putting it out. It's just, in my mind, it's disingenuous. This was somewhat of a manufactured crisis. And now to jump in front of cameras and say, aren't I wonderful? Aren't we wonderful what we did? To me, that's just disingenuous. But that's what we're dealing with these days. But that's what the left does. When you look at the methodology of the left, they either create a crisis or take advantage of one, and then they jump into that, and then in one way or another try to push through people's fear. They push through some type of a program or some type of a saving us, and most often using our own tax dollars, and take more freedom from us. So since we're talking about freedom today, we've seen that time and time again. We all know the famous quote by Rahm Emanuel, "You never let a good crisis go to waste," but in some cases they actually create the crisis as well. So I think that's very disingenuous to me, but we're seeing it more and more every day. And unfortunately, that's the mood in the country right now. That's what's happening, and that's what we're fighting against, quite honestly. That's one of the primary reasons why I'm running, is to stop this type of behavior, the growth of government and what the left is doing to us. So that's my COVID-19 moment for the day. Let's go on and review last week. So last week we kicked off this series, and I kicked it off by saying, when you step back and you look at my core message, it's a message of security, freedom, and opportunity. So I also talked last week about why. Why am I focused on security, freedom, and opportunity? Well, I think it's fair to say that all of us, every one of us, wants freedom and opportunity. And I think if you go back and just look backwards from this point, there's security and freedom and opportunity. We largely, as Americans, have taken that for granted recently. But with COVID-19 and some of the other things that have happened, I think it's becoming more and more to our consciousness that we can't take those things for granted. So in this case, yes, we all want freedom, we all want opportunity, but without security, if we don't have security, we won't be able to enjoy the blessings of freedom and opportunity. Security is a foundation block, one of the key foundation blocks for our world, our American world, and without that, we have no basis. So that's why I focused on security last week, and as part of a campaign theme, and then we'll talk about freedom today. As we talk about security, as I mentioned before, if you roll the clock back, say 6 months, and you were to say to someone, security, what's that mean to you, an ink blot test? I think most people would think in terms of national security. Who are the biggest threats out there. Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it North Korea? Is it Iran? What is it? I think now, though, after we've seen COVID-19, we've lived through that, we've seen now, when you think about security and really think about it, now we're thinking more in terms of personal security. And that's what I talked to last week. So some of the things we touched on last week was security is a core human need. It's one of the most fundamental needs that we have, that without that security, we just can't do anything else. So that was a very important point. And the other point I made based on that is that people have been shaken. If you recall, people, the emotions that people are feeling right now because of what they've experienced over the last 4 to 5 months, people are talking in terms of being very concerned. They're talking in terms of being alarmed. They're talking in terms of being terrified. So we talked a little bit about that last week. We talked about the different aspects of personal security that people have been struggling with since last March. We talked a little bit about the basic needs of just food and a new profound appreciation for things like toilet paper and basic necessities. We also talked about health security. You know, were we able to access antibiotics? Were we able to even access a doctor? We talked about family security, about our own jobs, our kids being sent home from school and having to take care of them and maybe not be able to deal with our own jobs, etc. We talked about the security around livelihoods, but whether you lost your own job, your business, we talked about that. We talked about financial. We talked a little bit about property and life. We've even been threatened with regard to our property, and in some cases, many people feel like even their life may be threatened in one way or the other. And then lastly, we talked just a little bit about national security, but it's very interesting how the world has changed in this time frame because our focus on security is a tad bit different than it was 5 months ago. We also then talked about the need to reestablish law and order, to support law enforcement, how critical that is. We are a nation of laws. One of our beyond constitutionalism, the rule of law is a fundamental foundation block for this country. We talked about needing to open up the economy, get the economy going again. It's starting. It's going to be a slower process, but we have to keep going. That was all in the short term. We also talked about bringing manufacturing back from China, et cetera, to strengthen our supply chain, to make America stronger. That's in a little bit of a longer term. So we touched on that. So again, without security, people break down and our society breaks down. When you don't have that security, things break down. And that's what you're seeing during this time frame. So that's what we talked about last week. I won't review any more of that. I want to get on to freedom. But freedom in a similar way. So we're going to talk today about freedom and have we lost it? Do we still have it? I think people have different viewpoints. I have mine and I will explain those here. But the other thing is with regard to taking things for granted. We talked about taking security for granted. I think, especially as I've thought about this past week, even more so, we've taken our freedom for granted for too long. And that's what I want to highlight today. As I do that, though, the first thing I want to do, just kind of as an aside, is do you know what is the difference between freedom and liberty? Ponder that for just a second. We use those synonymously or interchangeably in our speech. There is a slight difference, though, and I think it's worth a minute just to talk about that this morning. First, from a freedom standpoint, one of the definitions I found was the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. So people often talk about, you you open a cage of a bird, the bird flies out, the bird is free. We all have a strong understanding of what freedom is. So what's different about liberty? Well, one of the definitions of liberty is permission, especially to go freely with specified limits. So another way of thinking about that, liberty, there is kind of a permission associated with that underlying, or think about responsibility. So another way of thinking about it is liberty is freedom with responsibility. And a good way of thinking about that is if you're a sailor and you're on shore leave or you're on liberty, you're free to go and do things as long as you keep within certain bounds. So subtle difference, I'll probably use those synonymously, but there is a little difference between freedom and liberty. But I thought that was just a point I would touch on, and then obviously I'll move on here. So again, when I talk about freedom and why it's so important, why is freedom at the very core of our culture? Why is it at the very core of our system? I want you to think in terms of the freedom to pursue, the freedom to possess, the freedom to enjoy the fruits of our own labors. So just think about that as I continue on here. And I'll ask you a question. Have you ever heard of the book, The 5,000-Year Leap? You ought to get that and you ought to read it. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and it explains our system so well. But really what the 5,000-year leap talks about, the basic premise of the book is if you go back 3,000, 4,000 years, in this case BC, and compare that to where we were in 1700, even 1750, the premise is not a lot had changed. Agriculture was done much the same way. Many things were done pretty much, food was pretty much gathered the same way with agricultural advancements, but still not a whole lot had changed between, say, 4000 BC and 1700. So the premise of the 5,000-year leap is that something changed, and all of a sudden the innovation and entrepreneurship took off, and that was the great American experience. And the thing is people gained their freedom. And all of a sudden, for the first time, if you think back before 1700, you think back to Europe and other places around the world, did people have the freedom to pursue their dreams? Generally not. They were subject to a king or a lord, and everything they did was to support or go to war for that person. They really didn't have a lot of freedom to pursue their dreams. Did they have the freedom to possess? Not really. They lived on someone else's land, paid high taxes. They really didn't have a lot of opportunity to possess. So their labors went largely to someone else, the fruits of their labor. So again, were they able to enjoy the fruits of those labors? No. But with the great American experience, especially once we got our independence, then that's when the explosion took place, because all of a sudden, for the first time in history, people had the opportunity to pursue their dreams and put their work into something and then actually benefit from it. And with that came this explosion of innovation and all that we enjoy today. So that's why I say freedom is at the very foundation of our culture. So I think that's a very important point, because we don't really think in those terms. But my point is that if we ever lose that freedom, then our culture will change dramatically. And that's the fight we're in right now. People are trying to change that culture, and they're doing it for power. I'll touch on that in a moment. But just the basic fundamental thought that if we lose that freedom, we're going to lose the very thing that built what we get to enjoy today. So which kind of goes into socialism and communism as an alternative. Now, what I say, the old Herman Cain comment, how's that working for you? I'll come back and touch on that topic in a while. But, one of the first attempt at socialism or communism in the United States was with the Pilgrims. They struggled with it for 2 years. And only when they divided up the land and people had a chance to work it themselves, own what they produced, all of a sudden they started to flourish. So that just underscores how important our system is, and in fact, it's based on freedom. So, pause for just a second. When we think about freedom, we think often about Declaration of Independence and winning our independence from Great Britain. We also think about the Bill of Rights. We think about our 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. And I just wanted to share something with you. Can you right now name the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment? I'd learned a kind of a trick a few years ago to help me remember those 5 freedoms. And the way to think about it is start at your heart and work out from there. So as you start at your heart, the freedom of religion, that's number 1. That's the first one. Then the second one, come from your heart up. Number 2 is the freedom of speech. So that's number 2. Then keep working out to your hands, the freedom of the press. Think about writing something. So religion, speech, press. Keep working out from there. The next one would be assembly, because that's next. And then petition, freedom of petition. So that's a good way to remember those 5 freedoms. Now that's often what we think about. So one question I wanted to pose to the group today is, how would you relate protests, because we're in an age of protest right now, how would you relate protests to the First Amendment? Well, what I will tell you is I will fight to the death to defend people's right of speech, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. When you think about a protest, in essence, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about exercising your freedom of speech and your freedom of assembly. So I will defend that to the hilt any day. However, that's not about destroying property, tearing down statues, assaulting people. That's totally different. That is wrong. That is basically breaking the law, and we can't tolerate that. That's the battle we're in right now. There is freedom of speech, there's freedom of assembly, but what's going on today has gone way too far, and it must end. It's got to stop now. So along the same lines, how did we get our freedom? I think this is an important point. I think you all realize this. The answer is we had to fight for it. No time that I can think of in human history has someone just been granted their freedom. Everyone had to fight for it to have what the freedom that they had at the time. So in our case, that's why I always talk about Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Countless people have fought, sacrificed, and died so we could be free. And I think the key point here is it never ends. It's still going on today, 244 years later. It really is, it takes eternal vigilance. And that's what the fight is today that we're in. From foreign threats as well as domestic threats. And that's a key. You've heard the statement that freedom isn't free and that it takes eternal vigilance. And that's what we're about today. We're in this fight here in 2020 of who we are going to be as a country. We're going to decide that in November. But I think it's very important to realize that those threats don't always come from outside. We do have domestic threats, and that's what we see going on around us today. So, another question for you. I'm going back to my point about communism and socialism. Are people free in China? I think most people would say no. If you have any question, talk to the people in Hong Kong right now. Why do half of them want to leave? Are people free in Russia? No. Are people free in North Korea? Yeah, right. How about, here's one. How about Venezuela? Are people free in Venezuela? Now, I saw an interesting fact the other day that kind of surprised me. If you go back 60 years, Venezuela was number 4 in the world in terms of countries and the amount of affluency that they had per capita. They were a rich country because they had vast oil deposits and a relatively small number of people. So they were doing very well. Fourth in the world 60 years ago. Where do they stand today? 179th in the world. Why? Because you have dictators who took over the socialism and communism and what have you, and you end up with a huge disparity of wealth where some at the top are extremely wealthy and everyone else, for the most part, lives in some stage of poverty. So clearly in Venezuela, and we can see that largely in our lifetime, how you can go from something that's very positive, very affluent, to virtually destitution because of a system. So, and you could say the same thing about Cuba. And when you look at those countries I mentioned, how many of them, if you allowed people to leave, how many people would leave? I suspect probably around a third, maybe as many as a half would leave if given the chance. So why do people want communism? It's just a quick editorial comment here. Well, quite honestly, I think when you see people beat the drum for communism, what it is largely, it's useful idiots who are being used by power-hungry manipulators. You stop and think about it. It's all about power and who can manipulate to get it. So that's just a brief side comment, and I'll go on from there. Now, the main question for today is, are we free today? Really, are we free? We think we're free. We talk about being free. Are we free? So a few examples I thought of to just think about. First, up until a few weeks ago, you couldn't hold church services, but you could hold a riot or a protest. And along that line, you could bring 5,000 people into Westchester to terrify the residents, which was what happened. Second, you can't put up a nativity scene at Christmas. In many cases, you can't even use the word Christmas. But you can tear down statues of Columbus, Washington, Lincoln, and Grant. Especially bothersome is Washington and Grant, in my mind. Those two guys basically went out and risked their lives hundreds of times on the battlefield. They were not generals that stood in the background. They were out there, bullets flying around them. They risked everything for this country. And we have idiots tearing down statues today. That's very disconcerting. Also, I'm going to get a little, I think this probably isn't politically correct, but I don't care. You can have a convent, and some idiot says you have to hire a Muslim, and you're discriminating if you don't. No. In that case, you're a convent. You hire Catholics. And yet a judge someplace or a band of people says, no, you have to hire someone else, and you're wrong if you do. If you say something favorable about President Trump, you're immediately attacked, and campaigns are starting to put you out of business. I know we've been enjoying some Goya food this week because we will stand behind people like that. Now, here's one that might really shock you. If you indicate your support for President Trump on a school bus, you can no longer ride that public school bus. Do you think that actually happens today? Do you think that might happen in Chester County? Guess what? It has. There are people who can't ride the school bus today because they vocally supported Donald Trump in our county. Think about that. Are you free? Are you free? Well, it seems like it depends on who you are these days. But how can this happen? How can we go from the freedom that we've seen years ago to where we are today? Well, as I stop and I think about it, there's 5 pieces of that. I'll just tick through them. One, typically there's a target. What do I mean by a target? Well, someone to tear down, someone to blame. You typically have a victim. someone to manipulate, someone to exploit. You also, in some cases, you need a supply of useful idiots. You know, people who are willing to do virtually anything because when they're told to do it. You need to have those mobs that will put fear in people. Another one that's very, and this could be most, in fact, I think this is core as I think about it right now. A key element is no consequences. Think about this for a moment. Think about behavior and consequences. How do we as a society, you know, for the last umpteen thousands of years, how do you control behavior? Well, you control it through consequences. But when you don't have consequences, there isn't anything governing behavior beyond a person's own personal outlook. And that's what we've seen way too much in, I know recently, and in my lifetime, going back to the 60s where anything goes, then we've seen fewer and fewer consequences over time. And as a result of that, we've seen different behavior that is more and more unacceptable. The fifth point is a complicit news media, which I know you folks would all think about. Print, broadcast, they don't report the truth, they hide it, and they lie about it. So they're able to promote the wrong things, and as we try to talk about something, we end up being overwhelmed by the media. So those things, I think consequences and a complicit media are really some of the key support columns for this attack on our freedom. So I'll ask the question again, are we free today? Well, in the age of political correctness, the cancel culture, shouting people down, the media bias that we see, the media bias on steroids, I really believe that in many ways the answer is no, or at the very least, we're on the verge of losing the freedoms that we've enjoyed. So, I know that's very heavy, it's dark, that's where we're at. Folks, this is what it's about this year. We have a decision to make in November. Are we going to continue down this path, or is it time to say enough? We've had enough of that. It's time to move back in the direction of freedom and all the things that built this country. That's where I believe we need to go, but we have this decision to make in November. That's why I'm running. Obviously, you know where I'm coming from. I want security. I want freedom. I want opportunity. It's only going to count if we get out and vote and the vote comes out the right way. But how does it stop? What hope is there? Is there hope? I think there is. Actually, I'm very optimistic. I believe in the American people. I believe that there is a silent majority out there. And I think with all the things that you've seen around political correctness, the cancel culture, people are more silent today than ever, but there's also more of them than ever. The thing is, you'll never know it until November 3rd or whenever they're done counting the mail-in ballots, because people will not express their opinion today, even in a poll. So I think it's there. I know it's there. And now we just have to work hard and help people get out and vote. But I think there's two relative things that we need to do. One goes back to my point about consequences. We have to have law and order. We have to support our police and law enforcement. We can't have this anarchy and chaos going on constantly around our country, tearing things down. It just can't be. Secondly, we need to vote their leadership into oblivion. And I'm serious about that. We have to one, win, but ultimately win with a margin that sends a message that people on the left, you're going down the wrong path. America will not support that. That's vital. So vote their leadership into oblivion. Put responsible adults, real leaders, back in charge. Not activists with an agenda to divide, pit one against another, and tear down. That's what too many people in public life are doing today, and we're seeing it all around us. We've seen it for the last 3 months. One of my favorite quotes, and I think I've mentioned it here multiple times, you're going to get to hear it 2 more times. Bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. Bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. Let that sink in. It's true. We have enough votes out there. We need to get those good people out to vote. Can we do it? Can we do what I'm talking about? I confidently say, damn right we can. Now let's go do it. We have to do it on November 3rd. That silent majority is there. I'm standing up for the promise of America. I'm also standing up for the police. I'm standing up for true freedom of speech and religion, for security, freedom, and opportunity. Stand with me and let's do this. Let's get our freedoms back. Get to work now, make it happen in November, and let's get these freedoms back. We need it. Our culture needs it. The world needs us to be there. So let's do it together. Thank you. So with that, let me pause, see if any questions have come in. I hope there's some. So Hannah, we'll turn it back over to you, and any
That
questions?
sounds great. I have a good one here that I think is really relevant to what you're saying. So what do you think that can be done about television stations and newspapers that claim to be broadcasting or printing the news, when it is very evident that many are very biased against Republicans?
Well, I have a relatively simple solution. Similar to my comment about voting the leadership into oblivion, I think we have to defund those media. Now, this is an interesting piece. Defund them means don't watch them. They're an economic entity. One of 2 things is going on here, folks. One, defund them. If you don't watch them, then they're not going to get, ultimately, they're either not going to get advertising dollars, or those dollars are going to go down because they're touching fewer people. So to me, there ought to be our own version of a boycott on those entities. Now, as I say that, and you have to be serious about it, because if you support them, even if you support, like for instance, I've had this argument with my family before. If there's a particular show they like on NBC, I'd say, you know, folks, do you really know what you're doing when you're watching that? You're basically funding NBC. Now, I'm not sure how far I've gotten in that, although I think we're now on alternate platforms. But I think that's the basic answer: defund them. Now, the question I would throw back though is, why aren't there many, if any, conservative newspapers? Is a newspaper a viable media these days? And yet we still see a number of leftist newspapers out there. I contend that they are being funded domestically or from foreign people to keep the propaganda machine going. How do you do that? Well, let's just say hypothetically that China wants to support the New York Times. How can China support the New York Times? Well, with the way the system is today, they can outright own it and don't even have to admit it. Okay? But if they want to do it more subtly, what do? Well, they take out an ad. But it doesn't look like an ad. It actually looks like a newspaper article. But they're buying that space. They're subsidizing the media. That's going on today. So that's something we can't control as much, but the basic answer is defund them and fight against foreign people being able to subsidize them.
Absolutely, thank you. That one's a good one. Next on the list, we have Chrissy Houlihan is getting lots of press photos and getting out there. What are our plans to get our message into the press that we just mentioned we don't support? No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's what I meant about the media bias. We all know it's there. I mean, if you follow Chrissy Houlihan on something like Google Alerts, she typically gets 1 or 2 mentions a day, sometimes more. You have situations where, especially papers like the Daily Local News, they will try to get her in almost every day. If she sneezes, they'll put it in. In our case, we probably have served up at least 40 press releases in the last year, and how many of those have gotten in? So we know we can't rely on that. So in our case, we have to use more creative methods. So we are continuing to build our social media presence to where we work through different platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and that type of thing. We just started an account with Parler, so that's a way of doing it. We will do some TV, we'll do cable. We'll also do a lot of digital, as I mentioned, because that reaches more and more. We will be doing texting as well. We have to be more frugal and use the money when it makes sense. Like, for example, right now, it doesn't make sense to put a lot of money into media in July because a lot of people are on vacation or they're looking and doing other things. But after Labor Day, people start to they're back home, they start to focus. So we're doing that. We're doing as many meet and greets as we can. They're starting to open back up again. So we're doing that. People talking to people, friends talking to friends. So it's a combination of those types of things that we are doing and getting that we're building coalitions. So all those things are going on and they're getting out there. They may not be as visible as an ad, but just to give you a point of reference, if we bought 1 week's worth of advertising on cable TV, what do you think that would cost? Cable TV, not broadcast, cable TV, $40,000 a week. So we do need to be selective of when and where we do that. And we just won't waste money like the other side does.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. My dogs just exploded in the background. I have a question for you from myself, actually. So what suggestions do you have for those affected by speaking out? Perhaps they've lost their jobs or reputation for having standed up for Trump or being a Republican. How do we combat the need to speak out and the fear of speaking out?
Well, that's a very difficult question because most of me says, don't let them influence us. That's very hard though when you have a situation where you're not really sure how an employer might respond. I think right now, we are in such a situation that we have to be smart and we have to be careful. Ultimately, in some cases, fortunately, there's groups out there that are helping to fight for us. It's when you think about the Pennsylvania Family Institute and the work that Randy Wenger does, when you think about Judicial Watch, we have people out there who are fighting for us, but it's so daunting for us as individuals because if someone attacks us or fires us, then there's a whole process you have to go through and you have to typically fight it with lawyers and that type of thing. So it's very difficult. That's why I think in the short term, I think we have to be smart. We have to look where we can do things, but we have to be careful because of this. Another point of this, Hannah, is that elections have consequences. And we were ignoring that for too many years, and the left was pumping activist judges into the system. So you would like to think that the judicial system could help in a case like this, but with so many activist judges out there, we can't rely on that system to be fair and equitable. So I think we have to be smart, but then through our future choices with our elections, we need to put people into positions that will be fair, will make sure that there's a fair playing field, and that people can't discriminate just because I support this person or another. But it's a very dangerous time, and only by electing the right people, I believe, can we ever turn that around and get it back to where it should be.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Excuse me.
Oh, go ahead.
Would I be able to talk to John on this forum? Is that allowed?
You can ask a question.
Okay, that's.
I want to have a conversation here, but you can ask a question if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the question on the media. Unfortunately, what you said is true. You can not support those stations, but I know until President Trump started talking about fake news, I really never investigated that myself. I just thought that if they're saying whatever, let's say you said NBC, so let's just stay with NBC. If they said this is a news broadcast, I would take it for granted that they were broadcasting news unbiasedly, you know?
Right.
And there are so many people, like Chuck Todd just said the other, just recently, that he admonished somebody that asked a question about their broadcast, and he basically said, "Oh, this is not opinion, this is news." But man, this guy is like terrible when it comes to, you know, his bias is so evident. But a lot of people don't realize that until they actually go to say a different station like Newsmax or Fox or a more conservative,
Right.
You know. But is there any way that that these entities, whatever it is, can be held in check by saying, hey, if you're saying this is news, then you have to report news, not opinion, because so many times it's either opinion is filtered into the news, or they have what I like to call a lie by omission. They don't tell the whole story, like they did with the Attorney General not too long ago, where he made a comment, and Todd was admonished for that as well, where they left out the end of the statement that he made, which totally changed his statement.
Right.
Okay, I've said my piece. I just hadn't wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, you know, yes, I do. And, you know, I sometimes struggle with the freedom of speech, because to me, the freedom of speech implies that you have the freedom of speech, but you need to be speaking the truth. Now, I can understand where someone might be misinformed. So they may say something that may not be true. I can accept that as part of freedom of speech. But when they outright lie, and you can see that they're outright lying, and they double down on it, and they won't go back and retract, to me, I still struggle with the freedom of speech. But I will come down on the side of defending their right to speech. But then going back to my other point, there has to be consequences. Well, one consequence is in this society, we can sue them for libel. And that's happened a number of times. The problem is it's so onerous, especially for us as individuals. Like in a campaign like this, if someone comes out and says, John, you did such and such, well, then I got to come and defend it and come up with the money and, you know, the timing, all that type of thing. So but ultimately you need consequences. So you have the ability to sue for libel, and that's what people like Judicial Watch and others do. And then the other is the defund. But only when people feel that pressure will they stop it. And until they feel that pressure, they will not stop. I mean, you can tell they have been hell-bent for 4 years to get President Trump out of office. And they will stop at nothing. And I'm serious, they will stop at nothing. And the media is complicit. So we gotta turn it off, defund them, and take it to them with suits in order to have them stop. But it's a tall order. That's why this is a war we're in right now, really. And it's largely going to be determined in November which way we go. Thank you for your question. That was very good, very insightful.
Thank you, John.
That one for a while. It's sad when the only defense we have might be a libel suit, because you know what their tactics are. They will come out with a bold-faced lie, and then they'll quietly retract it the next day, but everyone remembers the first thing they say. That's just playing with psychology too. So that's what we're up against. So we got to vote them into oblivion.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that totally. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. I have a couple more interesting questions. I like them. So where is the millions of dollars of the BLM movement from corporations going? Can they be audited before November?
I really don't know. I mean, I suspect, I'm assuming that those funds that are going to Black Lives Matters goes into their treasury. But I think maybe the question is, where is it going from there? Where is it going out? We see it coming in. It's pretty visible coming in. Where's it going out? I really don't know. But that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know how public that is. I suspect it's not. There may be ways of through some form of Freedom of Information Act, but because they're a private entity, it may not be readily available. So now, one thing that's happening today is people seem to want to wear it on their chest if they are giving money to Black Lives Matters, and they actually come out and announce it. So I think it's fairly transparent at this point, but it is a very good question as to whether there is any ability to see that. I suspect the answer is not so much.
Yeah, sounds a tricky one for sure. Here we have a question. How can a small percentage of people take over our cities, destroy businesses, and attack our police?
Well, it's about consequences. If you assemble a mob of people, and basically it goes back to what I mentioned about behavior and consequences. If you get a group of people, get them energized, give them a cause, and turn them loose, and if a mayor, for example, what really has to happen in those cases is the mayor has to tell the police commissioner, don't, basically cease and desist. Don't arrest them. You stand by, make sure they don't do such and such. But so that in my mind, that has to be ordered by someone in authority. Otherwise, the police would do their job, and they would enforce that. So when we've seen them standing there, in some cases they're not even there. In other cases, they're standing there watching, and not even, that's like when the rioting was going on, they weren't even trying to keep people. I'm not even sure why they were there, quite honestly. They weren't stopping people from going into stores, burning buildings. But it all comes from some authority saying it's okay, here is what you're allowed to do, and here's what you're not allowed to do. So that's how it's done. It's done from a permissive authority.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that is pretty much all the questions that I've collected here. Would it be okay if I take a moment and talk about an upcoming event?
I insist.
All right, so I wanted to share with everyone that we just pushed out one of the summer events that's going to be really exciting. It's called the Run for John, or Run with John virtual race fundraiser. So you don't have to run, because I don't run, so I plan on walking this. And the way that this works is that you will go on customink.com. The link will be sent in the chat shortly, and you get a shirt. They're $25 a piece. Proceeds are going to be going to the Friends of John Emmons campaign. So this is a really cool way to support John and to support his campaign and get everybody kind of moving and grooving together. So you have 17 days to register, order your shirt, and we're all going to be running, walking, biking, hiking somewhere in Chester County on August 22nd. And I encourage people, if they are doing that, to tag the campaign, to snap pictures. But this is just, it should be a really fun way to kind of come together as a community and as a county and help this campaign and show support. So really excited about this. The t-shirt's really cool. It has his logo and tagline on the back. So when you're running, you can just show people that you're standing up for the promise of America with John. So like I said, I'll send this link out in the chat feature. It is a Facebook event as well. So that is all my little announcements as well. So thank you.
Yeah, what's really cool about the event that we have that Hannah's put together, if we're going to have several locations around the district where for those of us who actually want to get together and kind of run as a group or near each other, we can do that. So we'll have maybe 3 or 5 different locations identified. For those that still want to just run by themselves whenever, or are make sure that they stay well social distance and all that, you can do it as an individual, and we'll be encouraging you to send us pictures or some type of Facebook link that we can share as well. So it covers anyone, whether you want to get together, just want to do something by yourself. Lots of flexibility. It should be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it.
Same. Thank you so much. Well, that is all I have on my end. Thank you everybody for coming this morning and being here with us. So John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Well, I think just in conclusion, freedom is essential. We know that to our way of life. And maybe you have a new perspective on that today, just how important it is for our culture and what we've done over the last 244 years. We've lost much of it. I think we would recognize we've lost much of it. But it's still in our hands. That's the beauty of it. It's still we the people. So depending on what we do in November, we can have a huge impact on the future of this country. We need to. So let's fight to get that freedom back as it once was. And it's key. We have to get it back. We can't continue this slide that we've been on for far too long. One last note is there won't be a town hall next week. I have some other commitments that I have to get to. So we're going to take 1 week off. Most likely we will be back the following Saturday, but I wanted just to alert you that we won't be on next Saturday. So we'll give everyone a vacation. So again, thank you very much for tuning in. Appreciate your support. Make sure you're talking with friends and neighbors and help spread the word. And if we can do this all effectively, the tide and momentum is in our favor, but we got to do a lot of hard work between now and November to make sure everyone of equal mind gets out and votes, of like mind gets out and votes. So again, thank you. Have a great Saturday. Have a great weekend. And look forward to having you join in again in a couple of weeks. Take care. Stay safe. Stay well.
Happy birthday, John.
Thank you. I made it all the way to 62, Jane. Take care, everyone.
Bye.